Hey guys, MrPokke here. So I finally got a little bit of time to try Lacrimosa for myself after a wholly overworking week. I've got a little bit more understanding for her kit, build, arcs, rotations, team comps, etc. How you're going to be using her, should you be pulling for her. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into this video. So at a glance, Lacrimosa is going to be your classic main DPS, focusing on the Scorch and DOT reaction, which is going to be tied to Lacrimosa's Nightmare mechanic that serves as a DOT damage. So for this particular node over here for Nightmare itself, it does scale with Psycho Intensity, so Lacrimosa does need to build a little bit of Psycho Intensity stat aside from the usual crit substats. She can also be used in Discord and Nova reaction teams, but for that you do really want to get her additional awakening for the A6, because that will then give you a free Psycho energy, very similar to how the Zero or the MC is going to give you a free support skill. She can also be used for Discord and Nova reaction teams, but it does require her E6 to be a little bit more smooth and operational, and doesn't really feel as restrictive when it comes to playing, very reminiscent of a Zero or MC's redirect skill, where you can trigger the chain reaction from your other teammates. So from Lacrimosa's main source of DOT is basically going to be from the basic attack, so her entire rotation will revolve around the basic attack itself, while weaving the skill and ultimate to reduce the downtime from the basic attacks. I personally prefer to use range attacks because it's going to be a little bit safer, and you have more chance to hit a variety of enemies who can fly very far away, especially for extremely mobile enemies, such as for this brand new Beyond the Rails fight 11 against the enemy Lacrimosa. So to maximize Lacrimosa's DOT rotation, you can also use your basic attack cancel on the 4th basic attack hit, so for both the melee and the skill, and the very last 5th is going to be where she does a much bigger reaction. So if you want to point her hand or the zigzaggy swing thingy, you can cast your dodge or redirect skill to do a little bit of a cancel animation. If you do not want to cancel the animation from basic, you can actually just let go of the basic all the way, because whenever you cast her normal skill, which is not to be confused with the anomaly copy, the Morning Tomato over skill over here, it will instantly pop back into her 5th chain of the Tomato Metal, which is going to be the 5th chain of her basic attack. So you can do basic, cast your skill, then cast your 5th chain of basic again to deal the highest multiplier, because majority or rather the highest amount of damage is always going to be from the very last hit, which is going to be 182% for the range, as well as up to 200+% for the melee attack. A very important thing for Lacrimosa is that her basic attack on the range mode has higher damage on the 2nd to 5th hit and has more Psycho energy per hit, which is also why I prefer running range over melee in most scenarios. Then jumping over to the redirect skill, there's 2 different variations of this. One is going to be this over here, which is going to be the Morning Tomato, where she does her own small redirect skill. Another one is going to be called the Devilish Gift. Now for the redirect skill, there's actually a brand new mechanic which is going to be seen over here, the Copied Emily skill, also known as the Devilish Gift. So if you see in the character right now, this little icon from the skill where the bat's eyes are going to be open, that is where if you were to press the skill, you will actually let go of your anomaly, right? The anomaly that you're going to be able to copy, and then this is going to be going into a cooldown, and then at the very last hit of your attack, at attack number 4, it will refresh the cooldown for your normal skill, and then this will be her own personal redirect skill, right? Then you're going to repeat the cycle over again, and then this is going to cast the redirect skill for the summoning of the anomaly. So generally speaking, your first cast is always going to be the Devilish Gift, which is summons the anomaly, and the second cast is going to be from her own personal small redirect skill. If the copied enemy skill is not chosen, the redirect skill will always be Morning Tomato. It will make the rotation a lot more casual friendly. But if you do have the Devilish Gift and it's going to be already casted, doing her basic attack string until, like I mentioned, the 4th hit, it will instantly refresh your cooldown for the small redirect skill, so it's always going to be this. You can also swap to another unit during combat to reduce the animation, and then this will instantly pop open the smaller redirect skill. So after this, you will also immediately enter into the 5th string, so keep that in mind for any animation cancel. Then moving on into Lacrimosa's ultimate, keep in mind that the ultimate's melee damage does have a slightly lower multiplier compared to the range damage, which is going to be 1251% versus 1587% at least at level 7. So generally speaking, I tend to just stick with range for most of the time, but if there are other situations where you can use melee, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. Then for the 2 little bonus skill over here, one is going to be called Tomato Banquet, where she will do an additional damage when Discord is triggered if the target is going to be broken. But frankly speaking, this particular effect for Discord, we don't really have a very smooth Discord team, because the current teammates that we have right now is not going to be as developed, especially if you want to compare this with none of these. So maybe going forward in the future when Discord is going to be a little bit stronger and can proc this a little bit faster, then this additional 400% multiplier can be a little bit better, right? right? Because especially on the last part, it's only if the target is gonna be already weakness broken. Then for the second one, Sleep In, you will gain one additional attempt of Morning Tomato after Lacrimosa use Tomato Metal, which is gonna be how you can refresh your redirect skill at the very fourth hit, right? You can only activate this once per cooldown, so it's always gonna be big skill, basic, small skill, then the final basic. Then regarding your ultimate, you pretty much just use it whenever possible, and it will always apply your 5 stacks of Nightmare. Now jumping into the build for Lacrimosa, you can see for my personal Lacrimosa, I pretty much just went with the traditional crit rate as well as crit damage with a little bit of cycle intensity if I do find them in my substats for my console over here. Now the most important thing is that your 4-piece is pretty much always going to be Diabolos, because this additional defense ignore does in fact affect your Nightmare damage, which is going to be your DOT, so it will help to increase your overall damage considerably. There's pretty much no other alternatives, just stick with your 4-piece Diabolos. So your crit rate, chaos damage, and crit damage means that with attack, damage, crit rate, and crit damage is always going to be here. Personally, I feel that she doesn't really have enough crit rate to justify her having a consistent damage output, so I do prefer running the crit rate main stat on the cartridge over here. Now obviously if you cannot get a very nice subset, don't have to worry about it, but I do feel that having the consistent damage is going to be a little bit more comfortable in my playing experience. And like I mentioned, you do need a little bit of cycle intensity, but one very important thing is you do not want to have your other teammates' cycle intensity overlapping her own, because if we take a look into this portion over here, cycle intensity is only going to be affected by the unit with the higher value. So if anyone else in your team has a higher cycle intensity, it will actually reduce the overall effects that you're going to be getting. For example, this over here, the bonus damage for your Nova as well as Scorch by 7%. Alright, so if your Saki or Adler or your Daffodil or your Hanyo, they're going to have a little bit of cycle intensity, remove them and make sure the Lacrimosa is going to be the one with the highest amount of cycle intensity. Aside from that, just go for the traditional crit and crit damage and you will not go wrong. Now, one very important thing before I talk about the arc in depth is that her signature arc gives her crit damage to the DOT, and her DOT damage is going to be triggered based on the teammate with the highest amount of cycle intensity, which is why you want Lacrimosa to have the highest cycle intensity for the highest amount of DOT damage. Scorch is also going to be an as per cycle that is calculated based off the character with the highest intensity, and on top of that, Scorch can crit at a 50% flat rate. Thus, you want Lacrimosa to be the main Scorch driver, not Sakri and not Adler. So now moving on into her signature disc. This signature is perfectly designed for her and we're pretty much just going to get it. For those of you guys who do not want to pull for the signature arc, you can consider using Youthful Fantasy because it deals chaos damage, which is going to be aligned with Element, although it's not going to be as strong as the signature. Most likely going to be around a 20% damage drop off. So Youthful Fantasy is going to be the one that you can see if that I'm running on Daffodil, which is going to be the free thing you can obtain from the Black Tomb Anomaly boss. So you can just get one copy and just slap it on. One thing I want to keep in mind is that if you are going to be running Youthful Fantasy, you cannot have access to the crit rate main stat, which makes building her a little bit more annoying. So her crit rate is definitely not going to be as consistent. So basically, if you're able to get this, get this. If you cannot get this, you can either get Youthful Fantasy or you can even consider going for the Battle Pass arc option, but I don't have to worry about it. Now, jumping into Lacrimosa's dupes, this 6 dupe is going to be allowing us to get additional reactions outside of Scorch, such as Discord and Nova. So it will pretty much act as an instant cycler, very similar to the MC. I would say for your cycle teams, this is pretty much going to be your best awakening. However, when it comes to purely damage, if you do want to just do additional damage without caring too much about the cycle reaction, then awakening number 5 is going to be a lot better on that as well, because you are also able to not just have additional damage based on the target's max HP reduction from Nightmare, you also heal Lacrimosa's HP based on the Nightmare applied up to 1.5%. So this is going to be a very comfortable awakening if you do not care so much about the cycle reactions as well. If you are going to be going for additional dupes for Lacrimosa, so for example, if you're going to be going for dupe 3 and dupe 2, then I would highly recommend either 3 or 4 just for the highest amount of damage. 3 is going to be for faster Nightmare stacking, but you require your 5th basic attack string to land, so if you're going to be missing this, it's going to be really bad. 4 is going to be for longer DOT duration, which is not going to affect your DOT ceiling, but if the enemy moves around too much, especially if they keep flying all over the place like the current Beyond Rails 11, then it will allow you to have a much higher DOT uptime at the maximum stack, so it is going to be very nice for casuals. Therefore, these two is just going to be a very straightforward damage increase. So personally speaking, if you're just going to be going for 1 copy, you can either go for 6 or 5, but if you're going to be going for 2 or 3 copies, then I'll go for 5, followed by either a mix of 2, 3, and 4, depending if you want a little bit more utility or a little bit more damage. Now, moving on to the team comms for Lacrimosa, honestly, there's quite a lot of different ways you can actually consider building her. One very important thing to note is that she actually does not need to be tied with Daffodil, right? The only unit that she really wants is going to be Sakiri, because Sakiri's unique effect does allow her to get the additional DOT damage increase, which we do not have any other replacements, right? So this is going to be the most important factor for Lacrimosa and not Daffodil. So assuming that you're going to be able to get yourself a Sakiri with Daffodil, the other two slots is going to be a little bit more flexible, depending if you want to go for a little bit more of a break intensity with Daffodil, especially if you do have Daffodil's additional awakening, or if you want to just for a more general purpose buffer, you can also go for Hania over here. If you do not want to use either of these two units, you can also consider units like Adler as well as Fadia, just for a little bit more sustain and makes your team and source rotations a little bit more comfortable. Adler over here also does have the unique ability of the Scorch Rest reduction, so it can also improve your overall damage on top of that. I would say as of this very moment, I do not think Lacrimosa's team is going to be fully complete, especially if you want to compare this with Nanali with Hotori. And speaking of Hotori, you could also consider this very peculiar team comp where you can essentially run Hotori alongside with Lacrimosa, because Hotori can also complicate skills, which means that you're going to be able to get a rotation out just as a very universal sub DPS burst rotation at the very end of your Lacrimosa's ultimate. So if you want to go for that, feel free. So with the team comms out of the way, I'll just talk a little bit more about the burst rotation. So one thing to know for the rotation is that for her ability, which is which of the class of anomalies you want to copy, there are three main scenarios. This is going to be most preferred for AoE. So this spider actually does a very big amount of AoE damage, so you could consider using this against mob content. Then Black Tomb is going to be using the highest raw multipliers as we have right now, and then Tomorrow Devil is going to help you have the homing tracking system, which can land your hits a little bit better against bosses. So between these three, you can't really go wrong with any one of those. So for the general rotations with Lacrimosa, it's actually pretty straightforward. You want to apply your buffs first, followed by using Lacrimosa on the last unit on field to deal highest possible amount of damage. You can also kind of reference this with our Hotori guide, where we weave in Hotori as the buffer, then running in Julian as well as our MC to apply all of our different debuffs as well as additional attacks. Then we let Nanali stay on field for the highest amount of time before swapping her out. So Lacrimosa is going to be following a very simple concept. So a sample rotation can be seen from this screenshot right here, and I'll just talk a little bit more about notes for the overall gameplay with Lacrimosa. So number one, if the equipped enemy copy skill of Tomato Jelly or Black Tomb, you can swap cancel to another unit while the Black Tomb is gonna be attacking. For this particular thing, I'm not too sure if you can actually animation cancel with your ultimate, because while the ultimate animation is playing, I'm assuming the Black Tomb's animation is also playing at the same time, but I'm not too sure if Black Tomb is gonna be completely cancelled with the ultimate. But at least from what I've seen so far, if you leave your Black Tomb on field and you swap to another character while you're doing your basic or your skill, then the Black Tomb is gonna be finishing all of its animation. Then another thing to keep note is you always want to swap to Sakiri from Lacrimosa's 4th basic attack combo so that you can get the highest possible amount of Scorch, which is going to be giving us from the DOT damage buff from Sakiri. We can also do Lacrimosa's skill animation cancel by using our ultimate, swapping and or dodging by after casting the skill. Preferably if you are going to be doing animation swap cancel after Sakiri's E, Adler's E, as well as whichever the last slot's E is going to be, like for example, Haniel, Daffodil or Fadia. For Sakiri, you can hold E into Q for mob stages, otherwise you're going to be going for Q into E. This is to get the mobs as close as possible. So that is pretty much going to be a very quick little summary guide from my understanding with Lacrimosa. Generally for whether or not you should be pulling for her and this overall summary, yes, if you're going to be looking for a Chaos Element main DPS, or if you're going to be looking for a DOT playstyle. She's pretty strong right now and it's quite simple to play in a standard DOT team comp with fairly high damage multiplier and potent awakenings, which is going to be making her very desirable, especially in JP, because I think JP really likes the vibe of Lacrimosa. She also has very high potential DPS in a sweaty team comps along with the additional awakenings, and she has a lot of different difficult rotations, which I personally did not dig that much into, so feel free for the experts to find out over there. However, if you do not want to pull for a DOT main DPS or straight up don't really care about a chaos damage main DPS in general, you can save out your pulls for Shinku Eroi, and or if you cannot guarantee yourself the Lacrimosa, since every single battle in NT is going to be at 100% guarantee anyways, right? So with that, I hope this overall guide has been helpful, and let me know how you guys experience has been with Lacrimosa. On my current free-to-play account right now, this is pretty much going to be one of my best build units alongside with Nanali as well as Hotori, which means that my overall team building in NT is going to be complete for 2 different teams. Team 1 being Lacrimosa and Team 2 being Hotori, Nanali. Whether or not in version 1.2 we're going to be able to get a copy of those, we'll see how that is going to be, but hopefully they can release a little bit more of like universal support and sustain characters, because one thing I've noticed so far from my experience, I haven't built on my Fadia, but dying against Beyond Rails is very, very common if you do not land all of your dodges and as well as parries at the right time. So having a support or a sustain in that department is going to help us tremendously, right? So that's pretty much it. Let me know what you guys think in the thoughts and comments down below. Use code POKE10% off gamer subs. All the best for guided fools, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.